Have you ever been judged just because of the way you look? An old jacket, a regular economy ticket, can those alone make someone think you're worth less than everybody else? On a flight from New York to Denver, a flight attendant named Carla Benson seemed annoyed by a young passenger dressed simply, sitting in seat 24B, with a snarky voice and a smug smile. She said, "People like you belong in the back." But what Carla didn't know was that the woman she just insulted was Elena Brooks, the 38-year-old newly appointed CEO of Sky Vista Airlines, quietly flying incognito to observe her company's service culture. So imagine this. It's you, sitting there in silence, humiliated in front of strangers. What would you do? Get angry, fight back, or stay calm and remember every detail so you can change an entire system later? Today's story isn't just about disrespect. It's about how one woman chose wisdom and kindness to teach the world a powerful lesson about dignity. If you believe someone's worth isn't defined by the ticket they hold, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because Elena's journey will stay with you long after this video ends. That day, the sky over Denver was a little gray, with late autumn chill carried in the wind. Inside Sky Vista International Airport, Terminal 4, crowds of passengers packed in front of Gate 23 waiting to board flight SV-218 to Chicago. In the middle of that crowd stood a woman in a beige wool coat, her hair tied in a low bun, patiently waiting in line just like everyone else. No one paid attention to her, and that was exactly what she wanted. Her name was Elena Brooks, 38 years old, the newly appointed CEO of Sky Vista Airlines, the very airline she had taken over less than 3 months ago. But today, Elena wasn't sitting in first class. No assistant beside her, no luxury luggage. All she had was a small canvas bag, an economy ticket, and one very clear intention: to experience her airline as a regular passenger. Elena grew up in Baltimore, in a neighborhood where blaring car horns and the smell of gas fumes were part of daily life. Her grandmother, Lucinda, worked as an airport janitor for over 30 years. She used to tell Elena all kinds of stories about the polite passengers who stopped to say a small thank you, and those who looked at employees like they were just blurry background props in the journey of more important people. Maybe that's when Elena realized aviation doesn't just take place in the sky. It carries layers, glances, and unspoken judgments people rarely talk about. And today, she wanted to see for herself whether the respect her company advertised truly existed in every seat, every flight attendant's smile, every glass of water served at 30,000 feet. As the line moved closer to the gate, Elena heard the head flight attendant's voice from the front. "First-class passengers, please board now." The sentence sounded standard, but the tone completely shifted when she announced economy class quicker, colder, as if she couldn't wait to get it over with. Elena looked up. She saw the woman, Carla Benson, chief flight attendant somewhere in her early 40s, blonde hair neatly pinned, a perfect smile on her lips, but her eyes said something else. "I'm judging you." Elena stepped forward and handed over her boarding pass. Carla glanced, forced a polite smile, and said, "Seat 24B, all the way in the back on the left. Please move quickly so you don't block the aisle." The words weren't directly insulting, but anyone who's flown different classes knows that tone carried an invisible line between people who deserve service and people who should know their place. Elena didn't respond. She simply smiled gently and walked toward the back of the plane, where legroom shrank and the sound of crying children drowned out the hum of the engines. She sat down and began observing. In seat 23C, an elderly black man, Mr. Gregory Jones, in his 70s, carefully fastened his seatbelt. By the window sat a young Latina woman, Selena Morales, looking exhausted after a long business trip. They both smiled kindly at Elena, the kind of warm, soft smile from people who still believe kindness is always the right thing to do. Elena smiled back. Her heart quietly warmed. The plane started to taxi. Carla walked down the aisle, serving water. When she reached row 23, she stopped and poured water for the white couple in front, her smile glowing. Then Selena asked softly, "Excuse me, may I have some water too?" Carla didn't even fully turn her head. She just muttered, "Wait till I come back," and she never did. Elena noted everything, small taps on her phone, every action, every expression, every difference in how passengers were treated quietly, becoming evidence for what she came to see. Up in the front cabin, Carla was now beaming at a white businessman, adjusting his table linen and handing him water with both hands. The scene brought back her grandmother's voice. People don't always need to yell at you to make you feel small. Elena, sometimes their eyes are enough to tell you where they think you belong, mid-flight. Elena stood and walked toward the front to use the restroom. She paused near the curtain separating economy and first class. Carla moved fast, blocking her way. The restroom in the front is for first-class passengers only. People like you should use the one in the back. The sentence dropped heavy in the air between the engine noise and the sudden silence of the cabin. A few heads turned. Some exchanged looks. Elena stood still in the dim cabin light. Her face didn't show anger, just a quiet sadness and a deep disappointment. She spoke calmly. "I understand. Thank you for letting me know." She turned around and walked back through the narrow rows, each step heavier than the last. But in her mind, every word, every glance from Carla was carving itself like an unerasable mark. A young black flight attendant named Thomas quietly approached and handed her a small bottle of water. "I'm really sorry about what just happened," he whispered. "Not all of us are like that." Elena smiled, grateful. "I know, and that's exactly why I'm here." When the plane landed, it seemed like the story was over. But no one knew that just a few hours later. A nearby passenger uploaded a short video online capturing the moment Carla said, "People like you belong in the back." The video exploded across the internet. People argued, raged, and began asking, how does something like this still happen in the skies of 2025? It was only when a verified account under the name Elena Brooks, CEO of Sky Vista Airlines, posted a statement, "Yes, the woman in the video is me. And this isn't just about one flight, it's about an entire system." The internet went wild. Headlines everywhere. CEO in disguise insulted by her own employee. And that was the spark that ignited everything. A moment where power flipped, all because of a single careless sentence. Elena didn't lash out. She didn't fire anyone immediately. Instead, she chose silence and investigation. She chose to show the world that real power isn't in revenge, but in how you confront injustice with wisdom and respect. The story of that flight didn't begin in the moment of humiliation in the sky. It actually started long before, inside a small house on the corner of Greenmount Street in Baltimore, where a young girl named Elena Brooks was raised by her grandmother. After the video titled "CEO Insulted" by Flight Attendant went viral, people started asking, who is this woman? Why was she sitting in economy? And why didn't she get angry? To understand Elena's choice that day, we have to go back to the place where her earliest lessons about dignity and respect were planted. Lucinda Brooks, Elena's grandmother, worked as a janitor at BWI Airport, Baltimore, Washington International for more than 30 years. She worked night shifts sweeping hallways, cleaning restrooms, and picking up trash from planes that had just landed. 12-year-old Elena would often sit in a cramped break room, doing homework on a plastic table, surrounded by the whirring sound of vacuum cleaners and the sharp smell of disinfectant. One night, her grandmother pointed toward the big glass window, where the runway lights shimmered and airplanes sparkled like stars against the dark sky. She said, "See that, Elena? Up there, everyone thinks they're flying high. But down here, there are still people who have to bow their heads to clean up whatever they leave behind." That sentence stayed with Elena for years, not as a complaint, but as a quiet truth about humanity. In every flight, some people were served champagne, and some could only watch from a distance. But Elena was never ashamed of her grandmother's job. In fact, she was proud. Lucinda would always say, "Cleaning isn't just about picking up trash, sweetheart. It's how we make the world a little more bearable, even if nobody notices." Still, Elena couldn't forget the nights her grandmother came home silent, her hands trembling with anger. Once, a drunk passenger threw a cup at her and called her a trash lady. Another time, a restroom supervisor scolded her for being too slow and behind schedule. Those wounds weren't visible, but they carved themselves deep into young Elena's heart, planting the first seed of her belief a person's dignity is not defined by the uniform they wear. As she grew up, Elena studied hard and earned a scholarship in aviation management. She didn't just want a better job than her grandmother had. She wanted to understand the entire system, from service procedures to how a single smile or a dismissive glance could make a passenger feel valued or belittled. During her years working for different airlines, she saw both faces of aviation: one side elegance, courtesy, and warm smiles for first-class passengers; the other side exhaustion, silent discrimination, and a culture of selective kindness where money was valued more than basic decency. Elena didn't become CEO simply because of her degrees or financial expertise. She was chosen because they believed she could change the service culture. But few knew that, for her, this wasn't just a mission. It was a debt to her grandmother, and to hundreds of invisible workers who had silently endured the same pain. Lucinda passed away when Elena turned 30. At the funeral, a group of airport janitors came and placed a wreath beside her coffin. On the card, they wrote, "Thank you, Ms. Lucinda, for showing us our work matters just as much as anyone else's." Elena read it, and tears wouldn't stop falling. At that moment, she made herself a promise. If I ever stand in a place where my voice matters, I will make sure people like Grandma are finally seen and respected. And now, years later, when she was insulted on a plane inside the very airline her grandmother used to clean, Elena knew her moment had come, not to take revenge, but to begin change. When reporters asked her after the incident, "Why didn't you just reveal your identity right there and demand an apology?" Elena simply smiled and answered, "Because if I did that, they would only learn to fear authority, not to respect people." That was an answer only those who have witnessed silent injustice would truly understand. Elena wasn't looking for satisfaction or applause. She wanted to change how people measure human worth, from first-class seats to airport restrooms. Ever since she was little, Lucinda taught her every system can be fixed if someone is patient enough to start with the smallest change. And Elena, the little girl who once sat in an airport break room, now had the power to reshape an entire airline. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, tense meetings, doubtful stares, and resistance from those who benefited from the old system. But she also knew a small insult at 30,000 feet had just ignited what her grandmother once dreamed of: an aviation industry where everyone is treated as human. That's why when the video went viral, Elena didn't hide. She let the media speak first. Let society debate. Let people ask themselves, why did a flight attendant feel entitled to insult someone just because of their seat? Only then did she step forward, calm, clear, without excuses, without blaming. And in that moment, people didn't just see a CEO who had been insulted. They saw a woman who carried the voice of thousands of silent workers, those who were ignored simply because they weren't sitting in the front row. But before any of that happened, before she became the center of media attention or the face of reform, Elena made one bold choice to hide in plain sight among the very people the system had learned to overlook. And from that moment, everything began to change. That afternoon, sitting alone in her office on the 38th floor of SkyVista Airlines headquarters, Elena stared out through the fogged-up glass window. Planes were slowly taxiing along the runway. In the distance, the Chicago skyline faded into the orange glow of sunset. Yet inside her mind, everything felt sharply, almost painfully, clear. From the day she became CEO, everyone expected her to announce some grand campaign and international expansion, a massive restructuring, a bold new strategy. But Elena, she chose silence. She chose to watch, to listen, before making a move. Ever since her grandmother Lucinda passed away, Elena had carried a small weight-chain, worn brown notebook with her. The cover was faded, and on it were the words, "Respect isn't given, it's shown." That night, she opened the notebook and wrote only one sentence. "Tomorrow, I will fly like a real passenger." No press, no assistance, no security, no one knowing who she was. She booked herself on flight SV-218 from New York to Chicago. Economy class. Seat 24B, a seat usually filled by workers, students, or someone simply trying to get home. She didn't want to see the airline from a leather seat with a glass of champagne. She wanted to feel it from the lowest part of the plane, where the engines roar loudest, the legroom is tightest, and where disrespect often echoes the clearest. The next morning, Elena left her apartment early, not in the polished company car, but in an old taxi. She wore jeans, a beige coat, glasses, and her hair tied in a simple bun. The driver didn't recognize her, and honestly, that was exactly what she hoped for. On the way to the airport, she opened her phone and scrolled through the agenda for the next day's board of directors meeting. The headline topic read, "Elevating Customer Experience, 100-Day Action Plan." She smirked and wrote underneath, "To understand the customer, you have to walk in their shoes." At the airport, no one noticed the young CEO of SkyVista standing in line at the self-check-in kiosk. She printed her boarding pass and stared at the words Economy Seat 24B. A strange feeling rose in her chest, both familiar and painfully nostalgic. Because once, years ago, she had sat in that exact kind of seat, watching her grandmother head into another overnight shift, wishing someone, someday, would treat workers like her with just a little more kindness. And now she had the power to make that wish real. But before writing any policy, she needed to see with her own eyes where the problem truly lived. On the flight, Elena carried only a thin notebook, pretending to read an in-flight magazine. She observed everything: how employees greeted passengers, how they served water, how their tones subtly shifted based on who they were talking to. Tiny things forced smiles, tired eyes. The unconscious hierarchy in who gets served first revealed more about her company's culture than any internal report ever could. To everyone else, she was just a quiet woman in an economy seat. But in her mind, every pen stroke was building a map, a blueprint of what needed to change. As the plane took off, She thought of Lucinda, her grandmother, who once scrubbed the restrooms of planes just like this one. Elena smiled softly, as if speaking to a memory grandma. I'm here, not to fly higher than others, but to see more clearly the things you once talked about. That memory softened the edges of her CEO armor. She wasn't here to save a company. She was here to find its soul, the soul of the people who had kept it running quietly for years. None of the crew knew Elena was on board. Not even Thomas Reed, the young black flight attendant who always tried to serve all passengers fairly. To him, she was just another passenger in seat 24B, but that anonymity was her greatest tool. It allowed Elena to witness everything no corporate report would ever dare to write. From the way Carla Benson, the head flight attendant, spoke sweetly to first-class passengers, then shifted to a cold and clipped tone in economy, to how Selena Morales, a tired young Latina woman, was ignored when she politely asked for water, to how Mr. Gregory Jones, an elderly black man, stood waiting patiently while flight staff chatted casually at the front. Elena wrote down every detail not to judge, but like a doctor listening for a heartbeat, diagnosing something deeper, the sickness of indifference. When the plane landed, she didn't just walk away with a notebook full of observations. She walked away with a quiet ache. And on the last line of her notebook that day, she wrote, "We don't need more procedures. We need more respect." That single thought led to an even bolder decision, one that would shake the entire leadership team. At the next board meeting, Elena planned to demand that every senior executive at Sky Vista must do the same, fly anonymously in economy at least once within the next quarter, not to inspect, not to judge, but to feel what it's like to be unseen, ignored, or quietly disrespected. Because only when leaders feel dignity being taken from them do they learn how precious it is to protect it in others. That night, back in her hotel room, Elna stood by the window overlooking the glowing streets below. She knew that tomorrow's meeting would be about strategy, budget, and shareholders, but she was only going to talk about one thing, a story between people and people, a story that began on an anonymous flight, with a moment of quiet humiliation and with the courage to not answer it with anger. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Sometimes, to fly high, we have to first sit in the lowest seat." And that was the boldest decision of Elena Brooks' career. She chose humility as the beginning of change. And so, the next morning, on that fateful flight, SV-218, Elena, no longer the CEO, just a quiet woman in seat 24, met them, ordinary people whose lives, in just a few hours in the sky, would reflect everything she needed to see. The cabin of Sky Vista Flight SV-218 was softly lit by the morning sun. You could hear passengers chatting, the wheels of suitcases clattering along the aisle, and children laughing somewhere in the back. Elena sat in row 24 near the rear of the plane, where the engines roared louder, and the air somehow felt heavier. She placed her bag in the overhead bin, settled into seat 24B, and quietly observed her surroundings. Beside her, in seat 23C, was Mr. Gregory Jones, a thin, elderly black man in his 70s, kind-faced but with deep, warm eyes. He wore a dark wool sweater and an old knit cap folded neatly on his lap. When Elena accidentally dropped her pen, he bent down, picked it up for her, and asked softly, "Business trip?" Elena smiled. "Yes, just a short one. And you?" "I'm going back to Chicago to see my granddaughter. She just had a baby, first girl in our family," he said, and his smile lit up like sunlight breaking through clouds. The warmth of that sentence touched Elena. She had always admired people who talked about family with pride in their eyes, rather than with money in their tone. By the window sat Selena Morales, a Latina woman in her early 30s. She worked as a sales coordinator for a small pharmaceutical company. She looked exhausted, hair loosely tied, dark circles under her eyes from a late night, but she still greeted Elena with a polite, gentle smile. "Morning. Full flight today. I'm just hoping I make it to my meeting in Chicago on time." "We're headed to the same city then," Elena replied. "Let's hope it's a smooth flight." Selena gave a tired, slightly bitter laugh. "For me, a good flight just means not being treated badly." Elena looked at her, wanting to ask more, but Selena simply shook her head as if she was already too used to being ignored in spaces like this. Then a woman's voice came from the front of the cabin. "Good morning, everyone. Welcome aboard SkyVista Flight 218 from New York to Chicago. I'm your lead flight attendant. Carla?" Elena looked up. It was Carla Benson, the same chief flight attendant she had watched during boarding. Carla appeared in her perfectly tailored Navy uniform, red lipstick, blonde hair tied in a flawless bun, the textbook image of first-class service. In the front cabin, she bowed slightly as she greeted each passenger, her voice sweet enough to melt into someone's morning coffee. But the further she walked toward the back, the more that smile faded. Her voice shifted shorter, colder, stripped of warmth. Elena kept watching. There was a pattern whenever a white passenger needed something. Carla responded immediately. Whenever a person of color raised their hand, she pretended not to notice. And when Selena pressed the call button to ask for a blanket, Carla leaned in with a tight smile. "I'll check if we still have one left." She walked away and never returned. "Mr. Gregory shook his head, sighing softly. "This happens a lot," he whispered. "I don't hate her for it. I'm just sad that after all these years, people still see skin color before they see a face." Elena stayed silent. Inside her, something stirred, not anger, but a heavy sadness and a quiet shame. She was the CEO of this airline, yet here she was, witnessing her own staff treating passengers with bias as if it were routine. When Carla returned with the drink cart, Elena paid close attention to how she served people. A white couple in row 22 was offered choices with a cheerful tone. "Would you like white wine or red?" But when she reached Mr. Gregory, she set the tray down and asked flatly, "Water. No choices. No smile." Elena wrote everything down in her small notebook, not to use as evidence against someone, but to remember exactly how it felt to be quietly diminished in a place where you're supposed to feel equal. A few minutes later, Selena leaned toward her and whispered, "I don't get why they serve people like this. Is it because our tickets are cheaper that we deserve to be treated worse?" Elena looked at her, voice soft but firm. "No one deserves to be treated badly, no matter the seat they're in." She said it, but inside, her mind drifted to her grandmother Lucinda, who once scrubbed airplane floors so others could step on them safely. Meanwhile, laughter trickled from first class. Up there, Carla moved like a different person, graceful, friendly, helping passengers store coats, bringing lemon water, even folding blankets for them. Back in economy, she walked faster, avoided eye contact, rarely stopped. Elena knew if she wore a suit and a CEO badge today, Carla's tone would be completely different. But that wasn't what she wanted. She didn't need special treatment. She needed the truth. And the truth was, class wasn't measured only by ticket price, but by how people chose to see one another. Mr. Gregory told Elena he used to be an aircraft mechanical engineer. "I spent my whole life designing braking systems for planes like this," he said quietly. But sometimes I still feel like I don't belong here just because of my skin." Elena said nothing. His words cut into her like a thin, sharp blade. A man who had given his life to aviation, yet still felt unseen on a flight operated by her own company. That was the clearest reflection of what needed to change. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Elena looked around the cabin, a small, enclosed space where strangers sat shoulder to shoulder, breathing the same air, trusting the same crew. And yet, just a few rows apart, there existed an invisible line between those who are respected and those who are ignored. She knew if change was going to happen, it had to start here, in the smallest gestures, in how we greet, how we look at someone, how we choose to serve. She gave Mr. Gregory a gentle smile, then turned to Selena and whispered, "Maybe one day, things will be different. One day, you won't have to hope for kindness, because it will just be normal." Selena smiled a small, tired smile, but with a flicker of hope in her eyes. And in that quiet moment, a plan was forming in Elena's mind, not a proposal about profits or expansion, but about culture and dignity. But sometimes, to truly see the illness, you have to witness its clearest symptom. And just minutes later, Elena would see it a small act, but one that revealed the very root of the problem, how discrimination had become normalized in the sky. Flight SV-218 had reached cruising altitude. Pale golden sunlight spilled through the windows, casting soft light across the faces of passengers who were drifting into sleep. It looked peaceful on the surface, but Elena could feel something else, a tense kind of silence, the kind only those who have been quietly mistreated can recognize. Carla Benson, the lead flight attendant, started pushing the beverage cart down the aisle. She still wore her polished smile while serving first-class passengers. But as she moved toward economy, where Elena, Mr. Gregory Jones, and Selena Morales were seated, her expression changed completely. Elena glanced at her watch. Their row was the last one still unserved, while the white passengers in the rows ahead had received drinks and snacks 10 minutes earlier. Selena pressed the call button. The light blinked on above their seats. 1 minute passed, then 5. No one came. Elena turned her head slightly, looking toward the front. Carla was laughing with a white couple, happily chatting. They'd just asked to switch seats to be closer to the window, and within seconds Carla agreed with a smile. But when a Latino family of 4 seated behind asked if they could move closer together, Carla answered flatly, "I'm sorry, the flight is full. No seat changes." Then she walked away without another glance. Elena took a quiet breath. She lifted her phone, opened the Notes app, pretending to check messages while actually recording every detail, time, tone, behavior, not to take someone down, but to document a service culture built on selective respect, something she knew she'd have to confront during the upcoming board meeting. About 15 minutes later, Carla finally reached Elena's row. "What do you want?" she asked coldly, without making eye contact. Elena simply smiled. "Just a glass of water, please." Carla poured the water, set it down without a word, and moved on. As she passed, the cup tilted and droplets splashed onto Mr. Gregory's tray table. "Excuse me, could I have a napkin?" he asked gently. Carla barely looked at him. "I'll come back." She didn't. Elena leaned slightly over, pulled a napkin from her bag, and handed it to him. "It's okay. Here, let me help." He smiled, voice raspy yet warm. "You're kind. Not everyone notices the small things." Elena held his gaze for a moment. She remembered someone once said respect begins or ends in the smallest things. And there it was, unfolding right in front of her. A few moments later, Thomas Reed, the young black flight attendant, appeared. He spoke softly to their row. "I apologize for the delay. Would any of you like water or a snack?" His voice was sincere, not forced, not performative. Selina gave a faint smile. At least someone remembered us. Thomas nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. He hurried to the galley and returned with 2 cups of water and a few small snack bags, placing them gently on their trays. He said quietly to Elena, "I'm sorry if the service hasn't been what you expected. I'll speak to the lead if you'd like." Elena shook her head slightly. "No need. You've done the right thing." But in her heart, she knew Thomas had done far more. He had just proven that dignity isn't defined by status. It's defined by choice. Meanwhile, Carla continued moving up and down the aisle with a practiced arrogance. Up front, she lingered chatting with white passengers, laughing, adjusting coats, offering refills. In the back, she barely stopped quick steps. No eye contact. Minutes later, the call light flickered again, this time from the Latino family's row. Their little boy had spilled juice on his shirt. The mother raised her hand to ask for help. Carla turned, voice sharp. "I'm busy. Wait," and walked away. Elena pressed her lips together. This time, she lifted her phone and started recording video, not to expose anyone, but because she knew without proof, truths like these often disappear behind corporate smiles and polished reports. Thomas returned, helping the mother, handing her tissues, wiping the seat, calming the child. Elena made another note in her phone. Some people still choose kindness, even when the system doesn't require it. Midway through the flight, Elena noticed a silent pattern. Those served the fastest were always white. Those ignored were mostly people of color, or those who didn't speak English perfectly. Even the way Carla set down a cup of water changed, gentle and respectful in the front, hurried and cold in the back. None of it was serious misconduct, but it was enough to hurt. Elena realized this was the real issue, not an individual mistake, but a symptom of a company culture infected with quiet indifference. "Mr. Gregory leaned toward her and whispered, "You know, sometimes people don't need to shout to hurt you. All they have to do is pretend you don't exist." Elena looked at him, her heart tightening. "I know," she whispered back, "and maybe it's time someone stopped pretending not to see." The words were small, but to Elena, they felt like a promise. As the plane began its descent, Elena stopped recording. She set her phone down and looked around the cabin. Tired faces, averted eyes, people staying silent to avoid trouble. That's when she realized it's not just mistreatment that keeps injustice alive. It's the silence around it. Thomas walked past her row and glanced at her, his eyes asking, "Are you okay?" Elena nodded gently. She wanted to tell him thank you for choosing kindness, even when it would be easier not to. But she didn't speak. She just smiled. But sometimes, to diagnose a sickness, you need to see the clearest symptom. And just moments later, Elena would witness it, a moment that seemed small, just a simple prohibition, but it would become the very peak of humiliation. It was right there, mid-air, when the words "people like you belong in the back" were spoken, and the cabin turned silent as stone. SkyVista Flight SV-218 was cruising at 36,000 feet. The sky outside was brilliantly blue, but inside the cabin, the air felt heavy. Elena sat still in seat 24B, the steady hum of the engines filling her ears. Nearly 2 hours into the flight, economy class had fallen into quiet fatigue. Some passengers had drifted off to sleep, others shifted in their seats, and children were beginning to fuss. Elena glanced around, then decided to head forward to use the restroom. The line in the back was long, while the first-class lavatory up front was completely free. She hesitated for a few seconds, then quietly stepped into the aisle. To her, it was simple on a plane. Restrooms are for passengers. Human needs are universal. But she didn't know that a few steps would turn into the center of a confrontation she never asked for. As Elena approached the curtain dividing economy from first class, Carla Benson, the lead flight attendant, stepped forward, her eyes cold as steel. "Ma'am, the restroom up front is for first-class passengers only." Elena offered a polite smile, her voice calm. "I understand, but there are more than 10 people waiting in the back." "I only need a minute." Carla crossed her arms, her tone sharper. "I'm sorry, but company policy says economy passengers are not allowed to use the front lavatory. You'll need to return to the back." Elena frowned slightly. She knew for a fact Sky Vista had no such rule. She herself had signed off on the updated crew manual 6 weeks ago. So she asked gently, "Could you show me where that policy is written?" Carla let out a cold, mocking smile. "Not necessary. I've been doing this for 15 years. I know exactly where people belong." Then she leaned in, lowering her voice, but loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "People like you belong in the back." The words dropped like a stone into still water. Elena froze. She heard every word, every breath between them. For a second, she wasn't a CEO. She was a little girl again, sitting in the airport break room, hearing people call her grandmother the cleaning lady with thinly veiled disgust. Those memories hit like a wave tightening her chest. Not because she felt insulted, but because she realized everything her grandmother endured was still alive in this world. Carla turned away, ready to pull the curtain shut. But at that exact moment, Thomas Reed, the young flight attendant, stepped forward. His voice was calm, but steady. "Excuse me, but there is no regulation preventing economy passengers from using the front lavatory when the back is overcrowded. I was trained on that exact policy." Carla's eyes narrowed sharply. "Are you challenging me?" Reed Thomas didn't flinch. "I'm stating the truth. And I don't believe passengers should be treated differently just because of where they're seated." The air in the cabin shifted thick with tension. Several passengers looked up, some at Carla, others at Elena, the woman still standing there, her hand clenched around her coat, saying nothing. Elena could have revealed who she was right then. One sentence, and Carla would step back, apologize, maybe even tremble at the thought of losing her job. But Elena didn't say it. She simply looked into Carla's eyes and said quietly, "Thank you for letting me know. I'll return to the back." Then she turned around, walking slowly, each step measured. But inside her, something had changed. A spark, a fire. As she passed Thomas, he whispered, "I'm sorry. You didn't deserve to hear that." Elena gave a tired, gentle smile. "It's all right, Thomas. Sometimes you have to walk through the shade to see the sun clearly." He watched her go, not knowing that this quiet woman held the power to change the very future of the airline they both served. Back in her seat, Mr. Gregory Jones looked at her with concern. "Are you all right?" Dear Elena nodded softly. "I'm fine. I just need to remember this feeling." Gregory nodded back. He understood. Some wounds don't need bandages, they need to be remembered. So no one else has to suffer the same. Up front, Carla continued her work as if nothing had happened. smiling at first-class passengers with a sweetness so artificial it burned. Elena didn't look her way anymore. She just opened her phone and typed a single line into her notes. The real difference in service isn't in what's given, but in the attitude behind it. When power is handed to someone without empathy, it becomes a weapon to humiliate others. As the plane began its descent, Elena stared out the window. The clouds drifted peacefully, beautiful and untouched, as if nothing in the world could be cruel. But she knew beneath that perfect sky, judgment, prejudice, and quiet cruelty still existed, even within the company she led. And right there, she knew if culture was going to change, power wouldn't be enough. She would need courage. Courage to see, to listen, and to act without shouting. Before landing, Thomas approached row 24 and handed her a bottle of water. "I know you don't want attention," he said softly, "but the way you stayed calm, I respect that. Sometimes silence is a form of resistance." Elena smiled faintly. "Thank you. Thomas, I'm not staying silent. I'm just waiting for the right moment to speak." And that story, one that seemed to end in the sky, was actually where everything truly began. No one on that flight knew that the woman humiliated today would be the one to change the entire system tomorrow. But the frightening thing about prejudice is that it doesn't stop at words. When small power feels threatened, it often fights back louder, harsher, trying to prove it's still in control. And just minutes later, Carla would escalate the situation, trying to erase the evidence and threaten the very person who dared to stand up for the truth. The atmosphere in Sky Vista Flight SV-218 tightened like a violin string stretched to the point of snapping. After being challenged by Thomas in front of the passengers, Carla Benson, the lead flight attendant, could no longer hold her artificial smile. She walked faster, her eyes sharp, her expression simmering with anger. Elena sat quietly in seat 24B, calm, composed, almost as if nothing had happened. She had just experienced one of the most humiliating moments a person could face. But instead of anger, she chose silence, a purposeful silence. She needed to watch more because if it was just a careless remark, the story would have ended. But Carla's attitude told Elena this went deeper. About 15 minutes later, Carla reappeared. She stood in the middle of the cabin, voice louder than necessary. "Ladies and gentlemen, a reminder, passengers are not allowed to film or record the cabin crew without permission. Violations may result in a permanent flight ban." Elena didn't look up, but she knew those words were aimed directly at her. Calmly, she locked her phone screen and placed it gently on the tray table. Carla stepped closer, voice sharper. "Ma'am, I need to check your device. Someone reported you were recording in the cabin." A few passengers began to notice. Soft murmurs filled the air. Elena looked up, her voice steady. "Are you accusing me of something?" Carla replied. "I'm following procedure. You need to hand me your phone. Now." Elena's voice stayed calm, every word clear. "You have no authority to confiscate a passenger's personal property. And if you believe I violated a rule, you may ask the captain to confirm." Silence fell like a curtain. Carla hesitated just for a second, then raised her voice to regain control. "If you don't comply, I will report you and have you added to the no-fly list." And then from a few rows ahead, a calm but firm voice cut through the tension. "Excuse me, but you are overstepping your authority." All eyes turned. It was Lauren Carter, a brunette in her early 30s, final-year law student. She stood up, looking directly at Carla. "I know FAA regulations. There is no rule that allows a flight attendant to confiscate a passenger's device without the captain's order. and threatening a no-fly ban without valid grounds is a serious breach of protocol. Whispers spread through the cabin. A few passengers raised their phones to record, including Mr. Gregory Jones. He slowly stood, speaking in a rough yet unwavering voice. "I was here when it happened." She nodded toward Elena. "Did nothing wrong. If anyone should be reported, it's not her." Carla flushed red. Her hands tightened around the beverage cart handle, knuckles pale. "You don't understand the full situation. I am ensuring the aircraft's safety." Lauren didn't back down. Safety is not an excuse to humiliate people. If you're doing the right thing, you shouldn't be afraid of being recorded. The cabin seemed to split in two on one side. Carla, grasping for control, on the other. Elena and the passengers who chose to stand up not for attention, but for what was right. Inside. Elena felt something stir, unexpected, powerful. Strangers were standing up for her, in a place where most people chose silence. She turned slightly, nodded in gratitude to Lauren and Gregory, and then almost instinctively she turned her camera back on and set it openly on the tray table. Thomas stepped forward and whispered to Carla, "You should stop. This is going too far." Carla shook him off, shooting him an angry glare before storming back toward the front cabin. Elena watched her leave. A memory of her grandmother, Lucinda, echoed in her mind. When people are afraid of losing power, they'll do anything to prove they still have it, even the wrong thing. She quietly exhaled. Sometimes, the smallest power, like the power to serve or to refuse, was where a person's true nature surfaced. A few minutes later, Thomas returned and whispered to Elena, "I heard something in the galley." Carla called the cockpit, reported a disruptive passenger. "But the captain knows I'm here. He told me to observe and report truthfully." Elena nodded, her voice low but firm. "Thank you, Thomas. Just do what's right. I'll take care of the rest." She opened her notes app and typed, "Toxic culture doesn't begin with mistakes. It begins when mistakes are covered up." Moments later, Carla came back. She looked more composed, but fury still simmered in her eyes. She leaned down, whispering to another flight attendant. Elena didn't catch everything, but she heard enough. "Don't worry. I've got Preston's backing." The name hit her like a jolt. Preston Wilson, Vice President of Passenger Services, known for protecting his favorite staff. Someone Elena had just placed under internal review. And now Carla was using his name as a shield. Elena pressed her lips together. In her mind, the puzzle pieces began falling into place: arrogance, cover-ups, fear of losing status. This wasn't just one employee's fault. It was a chain, a system, a culture of silent power. She looked around the cabin, Lauren still standing, unflinching, Gregory with a steady gaze, Thomas, quiet but resolute. And Elena understood this was the moment she had to choose: to stay silent, like so many before her, or to stand by the promise she once made to her grandmother, quietly. She lifted her phone again this time, not hiding at all. "I'll let the truth speak," she thought. Light doesn't need to shout to chase away the dark. But the dangerous thing about prejudice is it never stops at a single sentence. When small power feels threatened, it often tries to prove itself through aggression. And just minutes later, Carla would escalate everything to a new level, trying to erase evidence and intimidate the one who dared to stand up for the truth. The tension inside Sky Vista Flight SV-218 was as tight as a string about to snap. After being challenged by Thomas, the young attendant, Carla Benson, the chief flight attendant, had lost her polished smile. She walked faster, her eyes cold and burning with anger. Elena sat quietly in seat 24B, calm as though nothing had happened. She had just endured one of the most humiliating experiences a person could go through. But instead of anger, she chose silence, a deliberate silence, because she knew if this were just a careless insult, it would have ended. But Carla's behavior showed something deeper, systemic. But before the confrontation could go any further, a voice cried out, "Mr. Gregory Jones." The elderly black man beside her suddenly clutched his chest, gasping for air. "Oh, God, I can't breathe," he whispered, his voice trembling. Elena immediately unbuckled her seatbelt and leaned over to support him. She placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling his pulse weaken, his breaths grow shallow. "Someone get a flight attendant." Now she called, calm yet urgent. Selena Morales pressed the call button over and over. The light blinked, once, twice, 5 times. 2 full minutes passed. No one came. Finally, Carla arrived, arms crossed, voice cold. "What's going on? Who keeps pressing the call button like that?" Elena fought to remain composed. "He's having chest pain. Possible cardiac symptoms. He needs oxygen right now." Carla scoffed. "Does he have a known medical condition? He might just be anxious from the altitude." Elena stared at her, disbelief sharpening her voice. "Call the cockpit. Now. This could be a medical emergency." Carla shook her head. "Let's not overreact. I've seen plenty of passengers pretend just to get a better seat or attention. I know this type." A cold chill ran down Elena's spine. This wasn't just indifference anymore. This was dangerous. And then a calm voice rose from row 19. "I'm Dr. Raj Patel. I'm a cardiologist. Let me through." He knelt beside Gregory, checked his pulse, breathing, and murmured, "He's in severe angina, possibly a heart attack. We need oxygen," and the captain notified. "We might need an emergency landing." Carla's forehead creased. Her voice dropped. "Uneasy, doctor. Are you sure an emergency landing could cost the airline hundreds of thousands of dollars?" Elena turned, her voice low but firm. "Money can be recovered. A life cannot." Silence fell, heavy, real. You could hear Gregory's breathing, the only sound louder than the engines. Right then, Thomas rushed in carrying an oxygen bottle. He knelt beside Dr. Patel, adjusting the mask over Gregory's face. "Thomas, inform the captain. Now," the doctor said. "Yeah, sir," Thomas replied, turning to go. But Carla snapped. "Stop, you are not authorized to contact the cockpit without my permission." Thomas paused, then turned eyes steady. "Fear gone. If I don't, he could die on your flight. And when that happens, who will take responsibility?" Carla froze. She stepped aside. Thomas disappeared behind the curtain. Moments later, the captain's voice echoed through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We have a medical emergency on board. We are diverting to Cleveland International Airport for immediate assistance. Please remain calm and seated." A soft wave of relief swept through the cabin. Selena held Gregory's arm gently. "You're going to be okay. Help is coming." Elena looked at Carla, whose face had gone pale. For the first time, she seemed to understand power could control seats, drinks, and rules, but it couldn't save a life. Elena quietly picked up her phone and began recording, not out of rage, but out of duty to truth. She filmed Thomas administering oxygen, Dr. Patel giving instructions, passengers watching in worried silence, and Carla frozen, powerless, because this was no longer just a story about discrimination. It was a test of conscience who acts, and who clings to empty authority when a life is at stake. Un amour. Au bon. 15 minutes later, the plane landed in Cleveland. Medical staff rushed in with a stretcher. Gregory was breathing weak, but alive. His eyes fluttered open. He squeezed Elena's hand, voice trembling. "Thank you. If it weren't for you." Elena shook her head softly. "No. Thank yourself for making them see what truly matters." Thomas stood nearby, sweat on his forehead. "If you hadn't stayed calm, the captain wouldn't have been informed." "Thank you," he said quietly. Elena smiled gently. "You're the brave one, Thomas. I did what was right. You did what was right, even when it could cost you your job." Thomas didn't speak, but he knew this woman wasn't just a passenger. Something in her voice, in her calmness, told him that after this flight, nothing would ever be the same. As the ambulance drove away with Gregory, Elena took out her worn notebook and wrote, "Up in the sky, we are all equal. Until someone forgets. Life doesn't wait for corporate approval." She closed the notebook. In that silent moment, she wasn't just an observer anymore. She had become a witness to awakening. But truth must be seen to be believed. When the plane landed, Elena thought everything would end quietly until the video she recorded began to spread. And within a single night, the whole country knew about what happened on Flight SV-218. No one expected that the woman who was insulted that day was actually the CEO of SkyVista Airlines. When the wheels of Flight SV-218 touched down on the runway in Cleveland, the entire cabin burst into applause, relieved that Mr. Gregory Jones had survived the medical scare. Some passengers were teary-eyed, others remained shaken. But inside Elena Brooks, something else was stirring. Not fear, resolve. She looked around the cabin, Selena's stunned expression, Thomas's anxious eyes, and Carla's pale face still trying to act unfazed. But deep down, Carla knew she had gone too far, and worst of all, it was all recorded. As the medics escorted Gregory out, Elena stood up and gathered her belongings. She knew this moment had come, the moment to stop being silent. She took out her phone, opened the video, unedited, raw, and pressed upload. Within minutes, a clip titled "SkyVista Flight Attendant Insults Black Passenger and Delays Emergency Care" appeared on social media. In the video, Carla's voice rang crystal clear. "People like you belong in the back." Other passengers began sharing their footage too. From every angle, the truth became undeniable. Carla saw it. She rushed forward, voice trembling, but still trying to hold authority. "Yeah, you're not allowed to post videos recorded on this flight. I will report you to the airline." Elena turned to her calm. Almost too calm. "You should do that, and make sure you report it directly to Elena Brooks, CEO of SkyVista. You know that name, don't you?" Carla froze, mouth slightly open. No sound came out. The entire cabin went silent. "I'm sorry." "What did you say?" Elena gave a small, quiet smile. "Yes, I am Elena Brooks. And you just told the CEO of your airline that people like you belong in the back." Silence. Absolute silence. No engine sound, no whispers. Just Carla standing motionless, face as pale as if she'd seen a ghost. Thomas Reed stared wide-eyed. "Lauren Carter, the law student," gasped. "Oh my God. I know you. You were just on Forbes last month." Selena grasped Elena's hand, her voice shaking. "I can't believe you're sitting here with us." Elena nodded gently. "I wanted to see what was really happening with SkyVista's service. And today, I got my answer." She turned to Carla, who could no longer move or speak. You believed power was in the uniform you wear, but real power comes from how you treat people. I'm not here to yell at you. Carla, I just want you to understand your actions today were seen, not just by me, but by the world. When the aircraft door opened, airport security and ground management were already waiting. They'd been notified by the captain after Thomas's report. Elena asked them to keep things orderly. But the news had already spread. Local reporters were there too. A journalist called out, "Ms. Brooks, is it true you're the CEO of Sky Vista and that you were insulted by one of your own staff on this flight?" Elena stood at the aircraft door. Wind brushing her hair, she didn't hide. "Yes, I'm Elena Brooks, CEO of Sky Vista Airlines. And what happened today is not a personal issue. It is a cultural problem when people forget that respect isn't something that comes with a first-class ticket." Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "I will not cover this up. We will investigate. And if necessary, we will reform everything. No passenger, no matter their seat, should ever be made to feel lesser." Applause rippled through the crowd. Thomas lowered his head, emotional. Carla stood motionless, tears finally falling. Within 24 hours, the video Elena posted surpassed 12 million views, headlines across the country. CEO insulted on her own airline. Elena Brooks speaks out, calls for cultural reform in aviation. From nobody in seat 24B to leader demanding change. On national television, a news anchor commented, "What moved people wasn't just that she was discriminated against. It was how she responded, not with rage, not with ego, but with truth and calm. And that made everyone look at themselves." At Sky Vista headquarters, the board of directors held an emergency meeting. Some feared a PR disaster. Others finally admitted this was the opportunity for real change. Elena did not use power to punish. She used truth to transform. That evening, she posted a short, unscripted video on Sky Vista's official page. Sky Vista was built on the dream of connecting people, but without respect, connection becomes empty. I promise to listen, to repair, and to make sure every passenger in every seat is treated with dignity. Thousands of comments poured in. One from an elderly woman stood out. "I used to clean airport floors. Thank you for standing up for people like us." Elena read it, and in her memory, she heard her grandmother Lucinda's voice. "You don't need to shout to be heard. You just need to speak with truth and compassion." In her hotel room in Cleveland, Elena sat by the window, watching city lights shimmer below. Her phone kept buzzing reporters, executives, employees, but she sat still. She replayed the clip, Carla's voice echoing, "People like you belong in the back. No anger, no hatred, just a quiet sigh." "No one belongs in the back," she whispered. "No one. But wherever light reaches, shadows will try to cover it." Just a few days later, Sky Vista released a vague statement trying to soften the incident. And that was when Elena understood reforming a system doesn't start with firing someone. It starts with forcing an entire organization to look straight into its conscience. 3 days after the incident on flight SV-218, America was in an uproar. News channels, newspapers, social media everywhere. People were talking about Elena Brooks, the woman who was dismissed and degraded on a flight of the very airline she leads. On morning television, anchors praised her remarkable composure and called her response a leader's dignity in action. Again and again, networks replayed the clip where Carla Benson's words, "People like you belong in the back," cut through the cabin like a blade, wounding the reputation of the entire airline industry. But while the public was burning with outrage, inside Sky Vista headquarters, there was another kind of silence, a silence that smelled like fear and calculation. That morning, SkyVista's official website posted a statement. SkyVista Airlines apologizes for the unfortunate incident on Flight SV-218. We are conducting an internal investigation to clarify all details. The company remains committed to putting customers first and will strictly handle any violation of service standards. A neat, elegant statement, but soulless, no mention of discrimination, no acknowledgement of systemic failure, no direct apology to the passenger who was insulted, who was in fact the CEO herself. And that, not the insult, was what made Elena angry. Not because she was disrespected, but because the company was avoiding responsibility, the very culture she was trying to change. That afternoon, Elena walked into the conference room on the 38th floor where executives and lawyers sat around a polished table, discussing how to control the narrative. No one dared meet her eyes. Harold Dunn, head of communications, spoke nervously. "Ms. Brooks, we believe it's best not to escalate this further. The board is worried if we admit fault. Stock prices could crash." Elena sat quietly, fingers interlaced. She looked out the window at SkyVista planes lining up to take off. Then she said, slowly, "Mr. Dunn, I'm not afraid of losing stock value. I'm afraid this company will lose its honor, and no one will pick it up." The room fell completely silent. She continued, "The statement this morning wasn't an apology. It was a cover-up, and I don't approve." She ordered it removed and replaced with a new statement, not crafted by PR, but written by her honest and clear. That night, SkyVista published a new announcement, this time signed by Elena Brooks as the CEO of SkyVista. "I personally apologize to Mr. Gregory Jones and to every passenger on Flight SV-218. I also apologize to the employees who chose kindness when the system around them did not. No one belongs in the back. Starting today, we will conduct a full, transparent investigation. Anyone who uses power to belittle others, no matter their rank, will be held accountable." Within 12 hours, the message was shared over 8 million times. International media called it the bravest apology in the history of American aviation. Ordinary people, especially those who had ever felt ignored or judged, felt seen. But not everyone inside SkyVista was pleased. Some mid-level managers whispered that Elena was dragging the company into crisis over one low-level flight attendant. And Preston Wilson, vice president of passenger services, rumored to be Carla's protection, was furious. "She's turning a minor incident into a moral circus. If I still had control, I'd shut this down." Elena heard that. She didn't react. She only smiled, because she knew every real change makes those who benefited from the old system uncomfortable. 2 days later, the first investigation results came out. Carla Benson, suspended immediately. Preston Wilson, placed on temporary leave pending investigation. A new independent ethics committee was formed, including frontline workers, the ones who had felt unheard for years. But that wasn't all. HR auditors uncovered dozens of deleted complaints, primarily about discriminatory treatment, unfair shift assignments, and biased crew scheduling. An anonymous former flight attendant emailed Elena, "Madam, I was moved to night shifts for 9 months because I reported our chief attendant's behavior. I thought it was just me. Now I know it was the system." More testimonies followed, not just from staff, but from passengers. Some said they were ignored because their skin was darker. Others said they were moved seats because they didn't fit the first-class image. Demi. Elena listened to every story. She didn't interrupt. She didn't judge. Sometimes she just closed her eyes. For a long time. Later, at a press conference, she said, "The hardest part was realizing that injustice was living inside my own house." In the midst of that storm, good news came. Mr. Gregory Jones recovered after emergency treatment. He called Elena, his voice weak but warm. "Ms. Brooks, thank you for not staying silent. I'm just a passenger, but you made me believe that some people use power to do what is right." Elena smiled softly. "It wasn't me, Mr. Jones. It was you and the courage of people like you that gives others the strength to change." But the storm hadn't passed. Financial newspapers reported Sky Vista's stock had fallen 7% due to reputation crisis. Yet on social media, a sentence from Elena's speech kept spreading. Reputation can fall because of one incident, but trust, if built on truth, will last. Elena didn't care about stock numbers. She cared about something else. Human dignity. Something she believed one day would be measured just as seriously as profit on a financial report. But truth, once brought to light, doesn't simply rest. When Elena presented all the evidence before the board of directors, she knew the real storm was just beginning, not only facing those who were wrong, but those who had stayed silent for far too long. Monday morning, on the 42nd floor of Sky Vista Airlines headquarters in Manhattan, the lights turned on earlier than usual. The executive boardroom, once filled with laughter, clinking glasses, contract celebrations, was now silent. No one spoke. No one made eye contact. At the head of the table sat Elena Brooks, hair tied neatly, face calm, so calm it made others uneasy. In front of her lay an open laptop containing the video that had shaken America, and the stack of documents she'd spent the past week collecting: deleted customer complaints, internal emails instructing staff to ignore and bury, and suppressed investigation reports. At 9:00 all board members were present. In the far corner sat Preston Wilson, Vice President of Passenger Services, still wearing his usual confidence. He had always been untouchable, backed by connections, protected by silence. Beside him sat Carla Benson, head flight attendant, hands clenched, head lowered. Elena began, her voice steady, controlled. "Before we start, I want us to watch something together. Not to blame, but to see what has been happening inside the culture we proudly call Sky Vista." She pressed play. The large screen flickered to life, replaying the scene on flight SV-218. Carla's voice. "People like you belong in the back." Thomas standing up to her. Dr. Patel rushing to help Gregory. Elena revealing her identity as CEO calmly, without rage. No one spoke. Only the faint sound of airplane engines echoed through the speakers like a heartbeat pounding inside the room. When the video ended, Elena stood. Her voice softened but carried weight. This was not just a personal mistake. This is the result of years of silence, of complaints ignored, of protection disguised as experience. She clicked to the next slide, a graph. In the past 36 months, Sky Vista has received over 2,400 complaints related to discriminatory or unfair treatment. 85% of them were closed within 48 hours without investigation. One board member frowned. "Do you have proof of this?" Elena displayed a chain of internal emails on the screen. The words were undeniable. Preston. "Close the case. Not worth the drama. Keep it quiet for 48 hours. Then delete." The room froze. Preston paled, then forced a half smile. "Elena, you're misunderstanding procedure. Those emails don't reflect the full context. I was just trying to reduce public pressure." Elena cut him off. Calm, sharp. "No, Preston, you weren't reducing pressure. You are burying truth, and that silence is what created people like Carla. She turned to Carla. Would you like to say something? Carla's voice trembled. I only did what I thought was expected. I was taught first-class passengers always come first, and economy. Another board member asked sharply, You said you were taught. Who taught you that? Carla hesitated, then whispered, Vice President Wilson. He said if VIPs are happy, everything else can be ignored. All eyes shifted to Preston. He shot to his feet. Enough. You're all blowing this out of proportion. Without me, Sky Vista would have collapsed years ago. Elena didn't argue. She clicked one last email appeared on the screen. From Preston to Carla Handel, it the usual way. I'll take care of any complaints. Silence. Heavy. Final. Elena stepped forward, looking at each board member. We've lied to ourselves too long. We talk about professionalism, vision, profits, and yet forgot the most basic thing, respect for people. There is no first class in human dignity. For a moment, no one moved. Then, an older board member, David Lang, who had once opposed her appointment as CEO, spoke quietly. Elena, you're right. I've been in this industry 40 years, and never has anyone stood here and said what we all needed to hear. Maybe it's time. Heads slowly began to nod. Elena took a breath. I propose the immediate termination of Vice President Preston Wilson and Chief Flight Attendant Carla Benson. Additionally, we launch a 90-day culture reform, transparent reporting, external oversight, and protection for every employee who speaks up, no matter their rank. 1T. Someone asked, and if the stock price drops? Elena answered softly but unwavering. Better to lose a few points on the market than lose the soul of this company. The meeting ended in silence. As people left one by one, Elena remained standing by the glass wall, watching Sky Vista planes shimmer under the midday sun. She whispered almost to herself, Grandma, I finally understand. Cleaning isn't just wiping floors. It's wiping away what keeps us from looking in the mirror. Down the hallway, Thomas stepped out of the elevator, holding a folder. He had been officially appointed as the employee representative for Sky Vista's Reform Committee. He saw Elena, gave a quiet nod full of gratitude. Elena smiled back, tired, but full of meaning, because she knew this was not the end of the fight. But for the first time, justice had been called by its name. But real change doesn't end in a boardroom. Firing people is only the beginning. The hardest part is rebuilding trust. And Elena knew culture cannot be reformed by documents alone. It must be felt in every small action, by every person at Sky Vista. In the days following the board meeting, Sky Vista Airlines looked like a body that had just come out of major surgery exhausted, but still alive. Outside, the media called it a moral revolution in American aviation. Inside, employees were uneasy. Some believed a new era was coming. Others whispered, She's pushing too far. But Elena Brooks knew one thing. If she stopped now, everything before would be nothing more than a beautiful performance for public approval. If she kept going, it would be a long road, filled with resistance and loss. She chose to continue. On the first morning of the reform program, Elena walked into the large auditorium at Sky Vista's New York headquarters. Hundreds of employees sat facing her, eyes filled with curiosity, doubt, and a tiny spark of hope. She didn't bring a speech, no slides, just a microphone and one simple question. Who here has ever seen or experienced unfairness, but chose to stay silent? The room was still. Then, slowly a hand went up, then another and another. until dozens, then hundreds, were raised in the air. Elena nodded. Her voice was soft, but strong. I don't care what position you hold. Today, I want you to know this Sky Vista will no longer be a place where silence feels safer than the truth. Within the first week, Elena introduced 3 reforms never before attempted in the airline industry. 1. Anonymous whistleblower hotline run by a third-party organization. Any employee can report favoritism, abuse of power, or discrimination without fear of retaliation. 2. Mandatory unconscious bias training for everyone, from ground crew to senior executives, including Elena herself. 3. Transparent work assignment system. No more favoritism or appearance-based scheduling. Flight assignments, promotions, and rewards now depend on seniority, performance, and customer feedback with full transparency. The press conference announcing these reforms was held on a rainy afternoon. Questions flew at Elena like darts. Ms. Brooks, won't these new rules make Sky Vista less flexible? What if employees abuse the hotline for revenge? Isn't this too idealistic for an industry as cutthroat as aviation? Elena smiled calm, unapologetic. Every change comes with risk, but the greatest risk is doing nothing. If trust is lost, no marketing strategy can save an airline. A simple sentence louder than any slogan. The first months weren't easy. Sky Vista's stock dropped nearly 15%. Some shareholders protested, calling her policies too soft. Several mid-level managers resigned. 2 lawsuits were filed, claiming Preston Wilson and Carla Benson were terminated without proper process. But Elena didn't argue. She worked, quietly, consistently. She flew frequently unannounced, without media. She sat in economy, watched how flight attendants smiled, how they handled frustrated passengers. On one flight, when a customer complained there were no meal options left, she watched as Thomas Reed, the young attendant who once defended her, apologized kindly and offered the passenger a future discount voucher. Elena watched him and saw proof of what she always believed. Kindness doesn't need a script. It just needs a place to grow. In just 90 days. The anonymous hotline received over 600 reports. 70% were resolved internally without punishment. Why? Because most people didn't want revenge. They just wanted to be heard. Elena told her new leadership team, when people feel seen, they have less desire to fight. One of the boldest reforms was called customer reflection. Every executive, no matter how high-ranking, had to spend at least 2 days a month working on the front line. Cleaning cabins, serving passengers, handling baggage issues. No exceptions, no media. At first, many grumbled. Some were embarrassed. But after a few weeks, those same executives began to say things like, "I never understood how hard it is to keep smiling after being yelled at by a passenger. I never knew customers could be so kind if we treat them with honesty." And quietly, Sky Vista's culture began to shift. One afternoon, Elena received an email from David Lang, the senior board member who once doubted her. Elena, I used to think you were too idealistic, but perhaps it takes dreamers to see reality more clearly than the rest of us. I flew Chicago-Dallas yesterday. It felt like a different airline. Thank you. Elena finished reading and just smiled. She knew the road was still long. Stock prices were still low. Some lawsuits continued, but she saw passengers smiling at staff and staff smiling back. And she knew what mattered wasn't numbers. It was the change in people's eyes. That night, Elena sat alone in her office, staring out at the glowing city lights. Beside her was a small photograph of her grandmother Lucinda Brooks, the woman who taught her that respect doesn't require a job title, only a truthful heart. Elna whispered Grandma. I've cleaned one small corner of this giant airport, but I know there are many more corners that still need sweeping. Her reflection in the window wasn't a powerful CEO. It was the same little girl who once held a broom beside her grandmother in a quiet Baltimore airport. And then, the magic began to unfold. When change comes from the heart, it spreads faster than any PR campaign. 3 months later, Elena was on another flight this time. No one knew who she was, yet everyone could feel it. The Sky Vista skies had changed. It was an early autumn morning, sunlight streaming through the windows at LaGuardia Airport. Lines of passengers stretched before the check-in counters, the PA system announcing in steady tones, Sky Vista Airlines flight SV-318 to Dallas is now boarding. Among the crowd, Elena Brooks moved like any ordinary traveler wearing a simple brown jacket, jeans, and sneakers, dragging a small suitcase. No one knew this woman was the CEO of the airline. Everyone had been talking about nationwide. She chose economy class, as usual. No PR entourage, no assistant. Just a small notebook, her personal truth meter for every flight, where she recorded what she saw and heard on each journey, guiding her ongoing culture reform. Stepping onto the plane, she immediately recognized a familiar face. Thomas Reed, now in his new uniform, no longer wearing the support staff ribbon. He now bore the title Lead Cabin Crew Economy Class. He gave a small, polite nod, not revealing a thing, just enough to say, "Welcome aboard your Sky Vista flight." His calm, confident voice and the quiet pride in his eyes warmed Elena's heart. Throughout the flight, Elena observed closely. No more cold treatment toward economy passengers. No subtle biases in glances. An elderly black couple was offered aisle seats because the wife had difficulty moving. A young Latin mother was assisted in warming her baby's milk without asking twice. And when a grumpy white passenger complained about a delayed meal, Thomas smiled and said, "Thank you for your patience. We're working to serve everyone equally because everyone matters." Elena looked around and quietly smiled, not because she had won, but because she saw change, real change, not in a report, but in every small action and genuine smile shared among people. About an hour into the flight, Thomas approached and whispered, "Would you like something to drink? Ms. Elna's." She smiled softly. "You remember how I like my coffee." "Right." Thomas nodded. "Of course, black. No sugar, no cream. Just like the way you face the world." They both laughed lightly. No words were needed. Both understood they had journeyed through storms, criticism, doubt, and now, a sky at peace. In the cabin, a group of young flight attendants chatted. Elena caught a fragment of conversation from Mira, a newly hired Indian crew member. "Before, I was scared. If I made a mistake, I'd be scolded in front of the cabin. But now, everyone supports each other. We even created a Sky Support group to share tough situations and learn how to handle them." Her colleague nodded. "Yeah, Thomas suggested it. He said, if we want passengers to feel respected, we must first respect each other." Elena pretended to read a magazine, but a wave of emotion surged within her. The very people who had once been victims of the old system were now its guardians of dignity. At the end of the flight, as the plane prepared to land, Thomas picked up the PA microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for flying Sky Vista. We don't just want to take you to your destination. We want every flight to make you feel respected, no matter your seat. Because with us, dignity has a place in every cabin. These words were not in a manual, nor a marketing slogan. They were spoken from the heart, and every passenger felt it. Elena looked out the window. The sky was unusually clear. She thought to herself, perhaps, after all these years, Sky Vista is finally flying in the right direction. As passengers stood to disembark, an elderly woman with silver hair grabbed Thomas's hand. You know, I swore I'd never fly Sky Vista again. But today, I realize I was wrong. Thank you. Thomas bowed his head humbly. Thank you, ma'am. Words like yours remind us we're on the right path. Elena watched from behind. No one needed to know she was the CEO. She just wanted to witness this, the truth that kindness doesn't require titles, only cultivation. Back at the office a few days later, Elena received the first internal report on customer satisfaction. 6 months into the reform. The opening line made her smile. Percentage of passengers rating very satisfied increased by 18%. Complaints about service attitude dropped by 74%. Employee retention rose by 12%. But the part that moved her most was the ending, a note added by HR. Most employees reported feeling proud to wear the Sky Vista uniform. Elena set the paper down and gazed out the window at a plane taking off. She whispered softly, "Pride. That's the gift I wanted to give them. That afternoon." She held a small gathering with frontline staff. No podium, no microphone, just a circle of chairs in the middle of the room. Thomas spoke of the Sky Support team helping colleagues manage pressure. Mira shared how passengers had sent thank you letters. Selena Morales, the Latin passenger from before, now a community ambassador, spoke about connecting passengers from different backgrounds. Selena's voice trembled with emotion. You didn't just change Sky Vista. You changed how we believe fairness can exist in an unfair world. Elena smiled kindly. I didn't do anything, Selena. I just removed what made people forget they were already good. But the story didn't end there. Even when the skies brightened, some people chose to come back from the shadows not to justify themselves, but to make amends. And that's when Elena realized justice isn't just about punishment. It's also about giving people the chance to change. 6 months after the reform began, Sky Vista Airlines was no longer the airline criticized by the public. Gone were the heavy headlines. Gone were the harsh interviews about discrimination. Instead, small stories emerged, passengers writing thank you letters, employees proudly posting photos in their uniforms, and flights where genuine smiles returned. When the internal data analytics team sent the quarterly report, Elena Brooks sat quietly, staring at the first number, customer satisfaction score, below 18%. She read on employee retention up 12%. Complaints about discrimination down 74%. The numbers spoke for themselves. But what moved Elena wasn't the percentages. It was the real meaning behind each statistic, what she had believed in. Once dismissed as naive, had proven its worth. On the office screen, a live dashboard displayed customer feedback, employee ratings, and candid suggestions in real time. Anyone from janitors to regional directors could access it. Elena had told the tech team during its creation, I don't want a perfect scoreboard. I want a mirror so we can see ourselves, both the good and the parts we need to fix. And now, that mirror reflected a new image of Sky Vista, not the biggest airline, but the most trustworthy. At a spring press conference, Elena stood before a sea of reporters. The camera lights were bright, but her voice remained warm and calm. We are not perfect, but what I am most proud of is that today, if anyone experiences injustice, they can speak up and know that their voice will be heard. Behind her, a short video played snippets of Sky Vista employees who had once suffered injustice, now reclaiming their voices. A Mexican flight attendant said for the first time in 10 years, "I feel respected." A black maintenance worker shared, "I used to think no one cared about what I had to say. Now it's different." Elena listened quietly. The image of her grandmother, Lucinda Brooks, appeared in her mind. You don't need power to make people listen. Child, you only need the truth. Amid the good news, a familiar face unexpectedly appeared. Carla Benson, the former lead flight attendant, the woman who once said, "People like you belong in the back." One afternoon, Elena's secretary entered. "Ms. Brooks, someone would like to see you. She says it's just 5 minutes. Her name is Carla Benson." The room went silent. Elna lifted her head, hesitated for a moment. 6 months ago, she thought she would never want to see this woman again. But now, she simply said, "Let her in." The door opened. Carla stepped inside, not in uniform, not with pride, just an ordinary woman. Her eyes filled with remorse. She spoke softly, voice trembling. "I'm not here to ask for my job back. I just want to thank you for not destroying my life." Elna stayed silent. Carla continued, "I lost everything: my job, my reputation. But losing it all made me realize how wrong I had been. I started working at a small customer service center. When I saw people genuinely smile at customers, I finally understood. Respect doesn't come from position. It comes from how you treat others." Elena looked at her for a long moment. She neither blamed nor forgave. She simply listened. Carla hesitated, then asked, "I heard Sky Vista is running new training programs for flight attendants. If possible, I'd like to participate, not as an instructor, but to share my mistakes. Maybe someone can learn before it's too late." A moment of silence passed. Elna nodded. "If you're willing to be honest, Sky Vista will always have a place for those who face the truth." A few months later, during the first training session, Carla stood on a small stage in front of dozens of new employees. No microphone, no script. She recounted that day the arrogance, the biases she had thought were professional instincts. She took a deep breath and said, "When I said people like you belong in the back, I didn't realize who I was truly lowering. Not the passenger, but myself." The room was silent. Some bowed their heads. Others shed tears. Elena stood at the back, observing. No need to step forward. Just watch and understand that genuine redemption can be more powerful than any punishment. At the end, Carla stepped down and met Elena's eyes. Both simply smiled, no words needed. Elena knew that this moment wasn't just one person's redemption. It was proof that Sky Vista's culture had truly shifted from fear to courage, from concealment to honesty. That evening, back at her office, Elena opened the dashboard again. She watched the numbers updating every second, each feedback, every compliment, every candid suggestion. A new notification popped up. Passenger Gregory Jones sends his regards to the Sky Vista team. Elena smiled, softly, as if speaking to the man who had inspired her months ago. "The sky is truly clear again, Mr. Gregory. Every journey, whether long or short, must eventually touch down. But sometimes, only when the wheels meet the runway do you realize the change isn't just in the flight path, but in the way people see each other." More than a year after the historic SV-218 flight, Elena Brooks returned to the airport on a gentle April morning. She was no longer the CEO surrounded by media cameras. She quietly watched passengers stream through security gates, among them Gregory Jones, the man who had nearly lost his life due to a flight attendant's indifference. Now, he was no longer a passenger victim. He had become an honorary customer experience advisor for Sky Vista, a role Elena had proposed. Gregory, wearing a gray suit and a small Sky Vista pin on his lapel, smiled when he saw her. "I guess I'm officially part of the crew now." "Right," Elena responded with a playful grin. "Not just the crew, Mr. Gregory. You're the reason the whole crew flies straight." They sat together at a small airport cafe, the same spot where Elena had sat before boarding that fateful flight. Outside the glass, a Sky Vista plane took off, its shadow stretching across the clear sky. Gregory sipped his tea, eyes distant. "It's strange. I remember that day vividly, being dismissed, made to feel invisible. But now, I sit here, talking to the person who changed an entire system. You know, Elena, justice isn't about making someone pay. It's about teaching the world what that cost truly means." Elena nodded softly, letting the words echo in her mind. At Sky Vista headquarters, hallways were now decorated with photos of real employees, no models, no retouching, just faces of different ages and ethnicities. Alongside them, a new motto was prominently displayed: connecting the world with dignity and respect. Not a marketing slogan. This was Sky Vista's lifeline, its guiding principle. Elena always believed that corporate culture isn't written in a handbook. It's how people treat each other when no one's watching. And now, more than a year later, she could see it in Thomas leading a training session, in Selena's warm voice helping elderly passengers, in the trust employees shared with each other. One afternoon, Elena hosted a small gathering in the auditorium. No grandeur, no press, only those who had walked with her through the reform journey. On stage, Carla Benson, the woman who had once caused a crisis, shared her story. She concluded with "The day I apologized. I didn't know if I'd be forgiven, but I knew I had to start there." The room fell silent, then erupted into sustained applause. Elena stood quietly, watching Carla. No bitterness remained, only the recognition that true change begins when people dare to look at themselves. After the meeting, Thomas approached Elena. "Do you remember the first flight I met you on?" he asked, a hint of nostalgia in his voice. "How could I forget?" She laughed. "The flight the world thought was falling apart, but was actually the beginning." Thomas nodded. "Thank you for saving not just the airline, but also our belief that kindness still matters." Elena gazed out the window as the sun set over the sky. She whispered to herself, "The world doesn't need more powerful people. It needs more people brave enough to be kind." Over time, Sky Vista became a model airline in the U.S., not just for steady revenue growth, but for the way it measured success not by profit, but by human trust. Major newspapers called it a symbol of renewal, and business schools incorporated Elena's story into courses on ethics and human-centered leadership. But for Elena, pride came from the simple things. A flight attendant once shared that a recent passenger from the Middle East said, "For the first time, I didn't feel suspected when stepping onto a plane." Elena read it and softly replied, "Worth it." And some nights, she still sat alone in her office, watching a small Sky Vista plane sparkle as it slowly left the runway. She thought of her grandmother, Lucinda Brooks, of the days spent scrubbing airport floors together. Her grandmother once said dignity isn't something anyone gives you. It's something you must never lose. Elena smiled. Now she understood. This reform wasn't just about cleaning up an airline. It was about restoring dignity to everyone who had ever been overlooked. That day, as Gregory prepared to leave the airport, he turned to Elena. "You know, the sky looks different now." "How different?" Elena asked. He smiled warmly. "I used to think it was too vast for one small person to change anything. But now, I know. Sometimes, just one person daring to stand up is enough to change the whole sky." Elena squeezed his hand. She said nothing, simply watched him walk into the crowd. And in that moment, she realized justice isn't about who's right or wrong. It's about whether people can change for each other. Closing narration. Call to feel. For video, one passenger insulted. One seemingly meaningless remark. One ordinary flight. But from that day, an entire system learned to fly with respect. Perhaps the world doesn't need more miracles. Just a little more kindness, and that's enough to change the wind. The story, Flight Attendant Insulted Economy Passenger. She was the airline's CEO in disguise, is not just about a flight or an insult. It is a mirror reflecting how people treat one another when they don't know who is sitting across from them. Sometimes, people judge others by their seat, clothing, or skin color, forgetting that human dignity has no class. Elena Brooks chose wisdom over anger, patience over retaliation, and that is what allowed justice to be carried out in a humane way. She didn't just change an airline, she awakened the belief that kindness, no matter how small, has the power to transform an entire system. And perhaps the greatest lesson for all of us is treat everyone with respect, even when you don't know who they are, because you never know. The person you dismiss today might be the one holding the power to make decisions tomorrow. Thank you for staying with us until the end of the story. If you believe that kindness is the universal language of humanity, please like, share, and subscribe so we can spread more stories like this, stories that soften our hearts and rekindle our faith in humanity. After all, what truly makes the world better is not power, but the choice to be compassionate every single day.